Well, good evening. Good evening. So, what is the difference between an oasis and a mirage? You know, you're going through a desert, and from a distance, they both look the same. Like, they both appear to be a source of life in the desert. But only one of them has a life-giving substance when tested. A mirage is nothing more than an illusion. When put to the test, it's no different than the rest of the desert around it. Our faith can be the same way. It's easy to put on the appearance of faith, but if you are tested, will you produce the endurance faith promises to those who believe? That's what we're going to be talking about tonight. Hebrews 11:6, it says, without faith it is impossible to please him, because we need to believe that he is, and that he is rewarder of those who serve him. And really, that requires us to take an action without knowing the outcome. Believing that God is, well, that in and of itself is no one has seen God. So to believe that he is taking an action based on evidence, not based on facts that you have seen, not personal experience. And also then trusting in him. But this story in Daniel 3 is all about that, where you have these three guys who are unwilling to compromise their faith. And as a result, God delivers them. But, you know, their own answer was, our God can deliver us, but even if he doesn't, we're not going to worship your idols. Well, there's a big question mark in that, isn't there? And so that's what we're going to be looking at. So in Daniel chapter 3, we'll read 1 through 7. Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, the height of which was 60 cubits, and its width was 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent word to the assembly of the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Then the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces were assembled for the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up, and they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "To you the command is given, O peoples, nations, and men of every language, that at the moment you hear the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psalter, bagpipes, and all kinds of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king has set up. But whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into the midst of a furnace of blazing fire." Therefore, at that time, when all these peoples heard the sound of the horn, the flute, the lyre, the trigon, the psalter, bagpipe, and all kinds of music, all the peoples, nations, and men of every language fell down and worshipped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. So, to begin with, Nebuchadnezzar calls together all the heads of the state. So we have a picture of, this is just the nation of Babylon. It goes down into Egypt, up over here near Greece. You know, they ruled all this. And so when he brought in everyone, they had a long journey to make. And some, you know, from Judah over to Babylon was about 1,500 miles. So Egypt is several thousand miles. That's a lot of rulers coming in. And we have all these different titles up here. This statue would have been, I mean, not quite the same, but think similar to the National Monument, obelisk, yeah, that sort of a thing. 90 feet tall, 9 feet wide. That's the sort of thing they did. Covered in gold with a picture of a guy on top of it. I used to always, when I lived in Salem, that's the capital of Oregon, and I would drive by the Capitol building on my way to the church. And on top of the Capitol building, there's what they call the Gold Man, which is like this man, it's like a golden man with a big axe on his shoulder, and it's the Gold Man. Well, I always looked at that and thought, that's like Nebuchadnezzar's statue right there. You know, it's a image of a man or an image that represents the state. And that's what this was. So just to understand what's going on here, this symbol is a symbol of Babylon. You notice he's inviting a whole diverse group of people from every nation and every part of his kingdom. We're all going to come together and we're going to unite under the banner of Babylon in this way. It was really a patriotic kind of thing that they were doing. It wasn't just forced idol worship. What it really was is Nebuchadnezzar's attempt to unite his kingdom under one banner. Now, we have something like this in our country. It's called a flag, right? And do you remember a few years ago at football games when they were, instead of standing up and taking off the hat and cross your heart, the football players were kneeling during the national anthem, and how patriots were really upset at the football teams for disrespecting the flag in that way? So that's what's going on here. That's what this story is about. It's about the guys who kneeled. Except for they didn't kneel, they stood when everyone else kneeled. That's the picture. That's it. So you have to put in nationalism into this, because that's what's going on here. That's who's involved. It's all these heads of state. And on top of that, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I think I taught about this before, and nobody likes me saying Abednego. Although my Bible software, Abednego is how he says it, but we say Abednego, and so there is no D in his name, but it's Abed. That's what I said, Abednego, but Abednego is what I was. You know, when the VeggieTales are called Rack Shack and Benny. So we could go with that. But, all right. However I say it. I'll say Abednego because I don't want to make you uncomfortable. But this is really, it is a false idol worship. I'm not trying to diminish that part of it. But I also just say what's going on here. It is really a attempt to unite your nation under one banner, because he's conquered all these different lands, and now we're trying to all come together. So what do we need to do when you hear the music and it's the bagpipes, the psalter, the lyre? I think it's funny, bagpipes. I feel like there's a translation problem in that. I don't think there's guys in kilts, singing squeezing their bagpipes or whatever happens. But when you hear the music, bow and worship, or burn in the furnace. That seems weird to me. This is kind of like on Dude Perfect. They play games with consequences. And so you play a game and whoever loses has the consequence, whatever that happens to be. And that's what this is. It's like games with consequences. If you don't bow, then you get thrown into the furnace of fire. This is probably a little bit of a Nebuchadnezzar add-on to his thing. He's not a good guy. So Nebuchadnezzar's not a good guy. So when you hear the anthem, and this is important. In polytheistic societies, it's not really a problem to worship the God of the nation that conquered you. Obviously, their God's greater than your God, right? So it's in every way, this is not a big deal. From the culture of Babylon, what on earth are you doing, right? And on top of that, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are... they're the guys who oversee the capital city. They're like Nebuchadnezzar's main guys. In Daniel chapter 2, it says, he found them to be wiser than all the other kids coming up in the leadership program that they were in, and their advice was 10 times better. So he brought them into his personal council. So this is like the president's cabinet. So everyone else is worshiping. Well, who decides to break the king's command? It's not the guy from way down in Egypt or way over in Greece. No, it's actually the guy from Babylon, or the guys from Babylon. And so that's a pretty big offense. It makes the king look bad. Like, well, you don't even have control of your own. You made us come all this way to unite us, and you can't even unite your own city. Like, that's what's going on. So that's, if you're kind of trying to wrap our minds around the political and the cultural situation, the culture wouldn't understand. Even in Christian culture, I've had my neighbors say, well, why are you always going to church twice on Sunday and on Wednesday? Like, why do you do that so much? Well, it's just what we do. Like, they're Christians, but they don't do that. They don't understand it, but that doesn't matter. It's just it's what we do, right? Therefore, they played it, and everyone bowed down. Verse 8, for this reason, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and brought charges against the Jews. They responded and said to Nebuchadnezzar the king, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound, the music, I'm going to just skip all these instruments, who hears all kinds of music, is to fall down and worship the golden image. But whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the midst of the furnace of blazing fire. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over administration of the province of Babylon, namely Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have disregarded you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image which you set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and anger, gave orders to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then these men were brought before the king. Nebuchadnezzar responded and said to them, Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Now if you are ready, at the moment you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the lyre, the trigon, the psalter, the bagpipe, and all kinds of music, to fall down and worship the image which I have made, very well. But if you do not worship, you will immediately be cast into the midst of the furnace of blazing fire. And what God is there that can deliver you out of my hand? So, it says that when he heard, he was in rage and anger. So he was pretty mad, but his response, even in rage and anger, seems reasonable, doesn't it? I meant it, guys. I was not joking around with that. I mean, you made your point, but let's go ahead and keep the command of the king. And in Babylonian culture, he didn't really have a choice. Once you made a command, you had to keep it. Like, the king's word was law, and you couldn't go back on it later. And so, yeah, okay, I see what you're doing there, but this is what you have to do. And it's not really a problem. Why would this be a problem for you to do homage to the image I set up? Like, I don't understand, you guys. It didn't also, if you anger the king enough, what we'll see at the end of the story is he says, anyone who doesn't, I don't know if it's disrespects, but anyone who brings a charge against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, we're going to kill him and put him on a pole and tear down his house and kill his entire family. Like, that's the command for going against their God at the end of the story. So the king doesn't have to stop with, oh, we're just going to hurt you, right? He can go further than that if he wants to. And he says, what God is there that can save you? Now, the practical reality is you're going to believe, you're going to die for a belief that makes no difference at all. That's what you guys are doing. Gods don't deliver people. Wouldn't that be Nebuchadnezzar's experience? How many nations has he conquered basically without being stopped and destroyed their gods, brought them into subjection? He's not being arrogant as much as he's being matter of fact. Is there a God that can deliver you out of my hand? Look at everyone here. Their gods could not deliver them out of my hand. What makes you so different? You're here because your God didn't deliver you out of my hand. Right? So that's Nebuchadnezzar. He's just reasoning. But isn't that reasoning sometimes easy for us to make as well? I mean, seriously, you know an idol's not an idol. Wouldn't it be easier just to appear like you're going along to get along? Isn't it easy to just kind of make it look like you're doing the thing so you're not causing a stir, you're not rocking the boat, you're not being a problem? And don't we have pressure like that in our own culture? Like, I mean, this is just one example, but what about the whole pronoun thing? Like, is it a lie to call a man her? Like, is that telling a lie, or is that, or do you just go along, if that's what they want to be called, then that's what I'm going to call them? Or any number of things, right? Just there's so many things where we're called on, and it really is against what God teaches, but it's definitely socially unacceptable to say something or to speak up, right? It's not acceptable to do that. And it's easy to go along to get along. It's easy to compromise, to just not rock the boat. And that's kind of what Nebuchadnezzar is kind of pointing out here, is like, look guys, it's not that big a deal. Your God can't deliver you. Why are you going to die for this? Right? But when we say, why am I going to lose my job for this? Why am I going to make my family and have no security for my family for this? Why am I going to, potentially lose a friend for this? Why am I going to hurt this person's feelings for this? Isn't there a lot of things like that where we tend to want to just take the softer approach? And that's what Nebuchadnezzar was saying is, what are you doing? You're going to die for your superstition. So who was Nebuchadnezzar? In Daniel chapter 2, verse 37, this is Daniel giving an interpretation of the dream, but he's addressing Nebuchadnezzar. And this is actually his true title. You, O king, are the King of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, the strength, and the glory. And wherever the sons of men dwell, or the beasts of the field, or the birds of the sky, he has given them into your hand, and has caused you to rule over them all. You are the head of gold. You are the King of kings, and if there's animals and birds there, you rule it. Now, who else has been given that title? That's Jesus' title. Do you realize this is the highest rank a man can hold on earth? King of kings. And that's who Nebuchadnezzar was. And the reason why God created a rank like that, so he could give it to Jesus. When he says all rule and authority has been given to me on heaven and on earth, the on earth part is this title. So that's who Nebuchadnezzar is, King of kings. In Daniel chapter 2, 12 and 13, what is this King of kings like? Okay, I need you guys to tell me what my dream was and tell me the interpretation of my dream. This is an impossible ask, but that's what he says. It says here in verse 12, because of this, so they couldn't do that. Because of this, the king became indignant and very furious, gave orders to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. I'm going to give you an impossible task. Tell me what my dream was, then tell me the interpretation of my dream. Oh, you can't do that? I don't want you dead. I want everyone like you dead. All of Babylon, we're killing the wise men. Does that seem like a good guy to you? No, that's a tyrant. That's what tyrants do. So Nebuchadnezzar was a brutal tyrant. Even in our story, worship the thing I made as if it were a god, or I'm going to burn you to death. That's not what a benevolent ruler does, right? He's a tyrant. Do what I say or die. In Habakkuk 1:11, it talks about how Babylon is a nation whose strength is their God. And Nebuchadnezzar is the ruler of a people who worship their own strength. What kind of a man do you have to be to lead a group of people who worship their own strength as if it were a god? You got to be tough. That is an unruly group. And that's what Habakkuk says about him is, how can you bring in such unrighteous people to kill those who are more righteous than they? We're bad, but we're not that bad. How can you bless them? But that's who Nebuchadnezzar is. He's the ruler of the people who worship their own strength as if it were a god. He is a tyrant. He is the King of kings, the Lord of lords, the ruler of everything on earth. It seems reasonable to me for him to ask, what God is there to deliver you out of my hand? And so that's what he does, and that's where he puts them. So how do they answer Nebuchadnezzar? Starting in verse 15. Or, excuse me, verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to give you an answer concerning this matter. Whoa, whoa, whoa. We don't need to give you an answer. I've already made up my mind, is what they're saying. We're not going to give you an answer. I'll tell you, but I really don't need to tell you. That probably didn't go over well. We don't need to... Okay, so who are they to be talking to this king this way? The most high-ranked man on earth outside of Christ, title-wise at least. So, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were captured as slaves while young. So they were slaves. They were captured, brought into slavery. Daniel 1, 3 through 4. They had a faithful disposition in Daniel 1, 8, 11, and 12, 15, and 16. So here's where Daniel decided not to eat the king's food. And then there was Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael, I think. That's their actual Hebrew names. And they were with him. And so they didn't defile themselves with the king's food. Rather, they chose to live off of vegetables. And so they only fed him vegetables. So they were, even at a young age, probably like 12 to 16 years old, they were committed to their faith. Here's just an interesting side note. Jeremiah would have been the prophet in Jerusalem to the royal family at the time these kids were brought into captivity, which means they may have learned from Jeremiah their faith. So there's an interesting little side quest if you want to look into that. They were wise. Here's what I told you earlier, Daniel 17, 18 through 20. They were 10 times better than the other youths that were brought into this. I'm calling it a leadership program. That's essentially what it was. And so they didn't eat the food. Doesn't seem like a big deal. But what Jesus says in Matthew 25, 21, and 23, here's the parable of the talents and the two servants that did well. He says, you were faithful in little, I'm going to put you in charge of much. See, these young men were faithful in little. And God put them in charge of much. And as they're in charge of much, faith is tested again. And they make the choice. I would rather die than concede my faith in this way. Regardless of how minor the matter might seem to be, I know doing that would violate the first commandment, you shall have no other God before me, and the second commandment, don't bow down to graven images. See, it's no small thing to compromise your faith. It's no small thing to go along to get along when it means violating God's law, when it means sinning against the Lord. Ultimately, that's what we're talking about. They chose not to sin against God, even if it cost them their life. Verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to give you an answer concerning this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But even if he does not, let it be known to you, O king, that we are not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. We don't need to give you an answer, but here's our answer. Our God can deliver us. He will deliver us out. The king says, who is there to deliver you? What God is there to deliver you out of my hand? They said, our God will deliver us out of your hand. He will do that. But even if he doesn't, we're not going to bow. 19. Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with wrath, and his facial expression was altered toward Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He answered by giving orders to heat the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated. He commanded that certain valiant warriors who were in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in order to cast them into the furnace of blazing fire. Then these men were tied up in their trousers, their coats, their caps, and other clothes, and were cast into the midst of the furnace of blazing fire. For the reason, because the king's command was urgent, and the furnace had been made extremely hot, the flames of the fire slew those men who carried Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell into the midst of the furnace of blazing fire, still tied up. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astounded and stood up in haste, and he said to his high officials, was it not 3 men we cast bound into the midst of the fire? They replied to the king, certainly, O king. He said, look, I see 4 men loosed and walking around in the midst of the fire without harm. And the appearance of the 4th is like the son of gods. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the furnace of blazing fire, and he responded and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, come out, you servants of the Most High God, and come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the midst of the fire. So, we have this situation, man versus God. Nebuchadnezzar does everything he could possibly do to beat them. Right? Furnaces at max heat. Ties them up. They're in their clothing. Gonna burn quick. It was so hot, the soldiers that brought them into the fire died. Like, that's hot. And it's interesting enough that those guys were willing to die for the king. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were in the fire. So that's what happened. In 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 20, it says, but if you do what is right and suffer for it, you patiently endure it, this finds favor with God. If you do the right thing and suffer for it patiently, this finds favor with God. You know, the reality is, if they had compromised, there would have been no reason for God to deliver them. They'd have delivered themselves, wouldn't they? They'd have compromised their faith, but they'd have delivered themselves. In this, they were able to see the deliverance of God because they stood firm in their faith. Remember we were talking about the mirage and the oasis at the beginning? Faith can be that way. It's only when it's tested. Do you stand firm, or do you find out that your faith was really just the promise but no different than the rest of the desert around it? That's what the question we need to ask ourselves is, are we going to stand firm or are we going to capitulate? So Nebuchadnezzar sees this sight. They're thrown into the furnace by the order of the king. They come out by the order of the king. Verse 27. The satraps, the prefects, the governors, the king's high officials gathered around and saw in regard to these men that the fire had no effect on the bodies of these men, nor was the hair of their head singed, nor were their trousers damaged, nor had the smell of fire even come upon them. Now, if you're even close to a campfire, you're going to smell like a campfire. The smell of the fire hadn't even come. God, how complete was God's deliverance? It was, the only thing that didn't last are the binds. The ties that bound them. Those burnt away. So maybe they weren't quite in the fire. No, the guys died going in. The bonds burned off. But they were okay. They were completely protected. How would God even do that? If you just stop and think, okay, what are the mechanics of this? How would God even do that? I mean, I guess he could just say nothing happened. And nothing would happen. But anyway, God completely delivered them. And they didn't have to give the king an answer, and they didn't have to bow to that idol. Right? God delivered them. Here's the outcome. Nebuchadnezzar responded and said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants, who put their trust in him, violating the king's command and yielding up their bodies so as not to serve or worship any god except their own." Isn't that a powerful statement? Blessed be the God. Because they put their trust in him. Whatever happens, I'm with God. They violated the king's command and yielded up their bodies so as not to worship any god except their own. Therefore, I make a decree that any people, nation, or tongue that speak anything offensive. So this would have been, everyone was present. So this decree would have gone throughout the whole kingdom at this point. That anyone who speaks anything offensive against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb for limb, their houses be reduced to rubbish heap, inasmuch as there is no other God who is able to deliver in this way. Then the king caused Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to prosper in the province of Babylon. So real quick, here's how we're going to end. Is Hebrews 11:1. Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. For by it men of old gained approval. So they knew their God. It wasn't a matter of, well, I hope he's there. They had confidence in their God. They had lived a life of faith. And when they were tested, they did not yield. They stood fast, and God delivered them. But in 11:6 it says, without faith it's impossible to please him. that's true. If they didn't have faith, they would have bowed. And they would not have been delivered. They would not have been pleasing to God. You have to believe that God is, and that he is a rewarder of those who seek him. And their statements say that. And so our encouragement tonight is for us to be the same kind of followers of God. Not ones who compromise and who go along to get along. And they also weren't belligerent about what they were doing. They just did what they thought was right. They weren't belligerent. They were just faithfully doing what God would have them to do. And that's what the call is tonight, is let's be encouraged to hold to our faith and also to trust in our God. So many times we don't know how things in our life is going to work out. We get bad news or bad things happen and we don't know how it's going to work out. And there can be a temptation for us to sin in a variety of ways, to not trust God in a variety of ways, to compromise our faith in a variety of ways. But there's also an opportunity there to trust in God, to see his deliverance and be a witness to his deliverance, not just to ourselves, but as in this case, to an entire kingdom or to an entire group of people that see us. And that's what where we should be with serving God. So if you're here tonight and you have a spiritual need, let those be made known as we stand and sing the song of invitation.